No, back. Hello, my name is Benny Garcia. This is Leading with a Moral Compass. This is the in-depth resource summary. First off, what is a moral compass and why do we need one? So for Aristotle, a moral compass is simply the benchmark against which you can measure the goodness of your individual actions and your overall life. The video from Chidu Skip Lee stressed that a moral compass has a true north. And we get to that true north by a variety of actions. Lee talked about trust via consistent displays of integrity, because once you don't have trust or once it's breached, you are kind of done as a leader, as a confidant, as somebody people look to in regards to how they should act and perform their duties. So integrity would be like the true north of this moral compass. And then naturally, selfishness that harms others would be considered the south. Lee also talked about this line that divides right and wrong, and that despite subjective contemporary views, that we intrinsically know or are aware or feel like where that line is. He also urges not even getting close to the line. And all this combining to create the moral compass. Okay, the other video from Frank Bucaro, he charismatically described a moral compass as our moral obligations for setting the tone in what you do. He had 5 aspects to this. His number 1 was always put people first in your decision making. So again, the being selfless instead of the opposite of the true north, instead of being selfish. Number 2, respect individual dignity. Um, this is where he told the narrative about himself going to graduate school for engineering, and his father like consistently being disappointed in his math grades. He stresses basically that you have a right to call into question people's behavior, but not so much their self-esteem. He stresses that educators really shouldn't equate worth or self-esteem with grade point averages or test scores. So you have to see the other person and respect individual dignity. Number 3, treat everybody fairly. This can be also described as the rule of law, or the rule of law in especially the school building, right? Everybody has to follow the same guidelines, educators, staff, and students alike. Number 4, be honest. There was a line Bucaro said that if you have a short memory, always tell the truth. That it's easier just to be honest, and that honesty can steer you into what Chidu Skip Lee called that true north. So honesty, pushes that needle towards integrity. Also, again, here's the line, right? This you see the similarity of the line in the sand, the where right is and where wrong is. Knowing what's acceptable, what isn't, what's negotiable, and what's non-negotiable, and you staying on that side of the line, so you don't even have any temptation to either get on the line or over the line. And so, if you can get in the practice of avoiding that, then it's easier just to stay on that true north path. Versus if you're a habitual line crosser, it becomes easier each and every time, and then you go further and further across the line. Bucaro also talked about Tecumseh, the leader of the Ohio Valley Shawnee Indians, as he started that federation to fight against the Washish. So he rallied all these Indian troops together, and before their giant battle in Indiana, he was quoted as saying, "Live your life so that the fear of death escapes you." Okay, so there's 5 reasons why you need a moral compass. 1, ground your identity. Basically, if you know who you are and if you have your own ethical values established, uh, it's easier to be more consistent with your direction of your true north. Number two, protect for the greater good. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So the greatest good and the least amount of harm for the most people. Number three, the increase of self-confidence. So the process of like self-reflection and inquiry begets a more intimate, familiar sense of self, and that increases self-confidence because like once you know who you are and what you stand for, you can do it more consistently and more confidently. Number five, be a good role model. Basically, like having a moral compass will allow you to guide the development in others. Good behavior is infectious and alluring. Once you see people act on, once you see the people's actions are propelled by a desire to do good, that becomes attractive, and you want to replicate that behavior. And number five, foster healthy relationships. I think this is the not me, me, but we, we. You want to, people with a strong moral compass know that they are part of a larger society. They're a, that the world, it doesn't necessarily revolve around them, but that they are a significant cog that connects to bigger cogs. And all on the basis of doing the most good, being altruistic, and minimizing what we call harm. So that brings us to challenges to composing a moral compass. So most of our decisions are actually based on automatic, intuitive emotions. I believe it was said like 90% of our decision makings are actually emotional reactions. So we have emotions, and we've developed our emotions because of the social contract. Our emotions evolve so we can better interact with the contemporary society. Um, there are a variety of emotions. There's self-conscious emotions such as guilt, shame, and embarrassment. This is where our decisions are motivated to avoid those feelings, feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment. There's other condemning emotions such as contempt, anger, and disgust. So we might avoid unethical, immoral behavior because we don't want to draw those feelings from our contemporaries, from our peers. Also, other praising emotions might motivate our behavior, motivate us to use our moral compass, and that's gratitude and moral elevation. Again, good behavior is infectious. I want to do good, not just because it feels good, but because I am encouraging others around me to use their sense of morality, to follow their true north. And then other suffering emotions, sympathy, compassion, and empathy. Again, this is where this emotion drives our decision making because we might feel empathetic or we might feel sorry for somebody, and that drives our decision making as well. So this is a challenge because making decisions based on emotions is risky because of something called moral dumbfounding. Emotions are fallible, they're not concrete. And also another thing is rationalizations, using rationalizations to deceive ourselves. This includes things like mental gymnastics or even cognitive dissonance or just straight up denial. The third one, and why decisions based on emotions are a challenge to composing moral compass, is that emotional reactions are quicker than logical thoughts. And this, though, despite all of this, we can push pause, right? And we can utilize mindfulness. We can acknowledge our emotions and acknowledge our own thought process. We can basically think about how we're thinking, pump the brakes, slow down, and am I being, are my emotions driving this decision that I'm going to make? And in regards to composing that moral compass, how much of that is based on how I feel? Some other challenges to composing a moral compass. the tendency to just not use it. You can sometimes be expedient, or you can implement expedient actions. So maybe to avoid conflict or confrontation, this is maybe you do the less ethical thing because it's just easier. It minimizes conflict and confrontation, even though we know that sometimes the right thing to do is difficult. It might draw confrontation or conflict, but sometimes we just want to avoid that, awkwardness or that cringe feeling. Number two, ethical dilemmas, right versus right. Again, to basically avoid conflict and confrontation, unease, discomfort. Sometimes it's just easier to do the not fully moral thing just to avoid those instances of confrontation. Number three, self-interest and benefits as a result of unethical decisions. Right? I'm not going to do this ethical thing because of profitable reason X, Y, Z. I might do the shady thing because it will result in something that's good for me, regardless of the harm or exploitation or whatever it might cause another person. Okay, so another challenge to composing a moral compass are the arguments critical of empathy as being the foundation for morality and the non-static subjectivity of a moral compass to establish a social contract. Or, in a nutshell, the non-consensus on what empathy is, the subjectivity in regards to like things of the terminology of a moral compass, also the subjectivity in regards to our perceptions of reality and the idea of the social contract. So there's no clear understanding of what empathy is. There's a variety of descriptions of it. Empathy of the wide ranging explanations of empathy. There's two main levels. There's cognitive empathy. That's when we know what the other person is thinking. And then like affective empathy. That's when we feel what the other person is feeling. We usually hear to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, right? Um, so we have some risks that come with using empathy as the foundation for morality. Um, and some of those risks include things like burnout, emotional hijacking, because we're talking about the words know and feel. And I think that's where the problem with empathy comes in, as this article is stating. We can, when we feel, like when we actually feel someone else's sadness or anger, that can wear us down. And that's what can cause burnout and emotional hijacking. Other thing too is that the idea of no, and what one of the problems with this aspect of empathy is like, how can you really know what the other person is thinking? Then the process of thinking in itself and empathy in itself might actually be selfish, versus like selfless action into what I'll call integrity-based investigation. Some other problems with empathy is that since empathy has this like selfish, intrinsic internal process that kind of jives with the neoliberal concept of the self, so that cultivates the necessity for empathy, since empathy begins with the self, what we call the I. It's like, oh, I feel sorry for him, or I feel you, or I feel your pain. Because then again, it's like, it's how I'm feeling. Empathy is biased and unreliable, and thus unsuitable as a moral compass. Empathy may lead to selfish decisions rather than altruistic action. Again, it's the alleviation of pain for oneself. I'm empathetic, not really because I fully understand your situation, but I see you in dealing with these unfortunate circumstances, and it makes me feel bad. So then I have to do something so I can feel better. What that is getting at is this concept of sameness versus plurality or differences, right? Or the imperialism of the same. And basically, we want to avoid that. And that can be remedied with um, understanding and visiting. So, understanding the world from multiple perspectives in a never ending manner whilst developing your own or their own voice and ability to take responsibility. I'm understanding that you are a unique individual with your own perception of reality. And I agree to continually learn about that and respect that. Not only that, to visit, to expose myself and open up myself to your way of life, to your culture, and things like that. Another challenge when composing a moral compass that was talked about in the article about South Africa is the subjectivity of reality and the lack of consensus on what a social contract should be composed of. What the article did was talk about South Africa and apartheid, in which there was segregation from, I think, 1948 to 1994, that basically separated whites from blacks. Sometimes blacks would have to have, passes just to get into like white territory. Similar to what happened in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement. But they talk about the need for citizenship education, and they want, for the sake of posterity, students to commit to a new amendable moral compass, basically this thing they call consciousness with a conscience, and to accompany a new social contract. They're like, well, how do you make that moral compass, and how do you establish that social contract? The main problem is you have this ethical dilemma of right versus right. You have involuntary migrants and refugees clashing with already socially, religiously, culturally, socioeconomically convicted indigenous people. So you basically have, refugees fleeing war-torn countries meeting citizens of country XYZ, and the people of country XYZ already have their problems, and so you have those coming together of those worlds. And so now, how do we develop a moral compass that can be utilized by everybody involved? The other thing that was a challenge to making a moral compass is the constructivist interpretive theory. And this is when people's perceptions of reality are never expressions of an objective world, but rather subjective constructions of complex personal experiences in and of the world and its phenomena. We all see the world subjectively, and that subjective interpretation makes for our reality. And when there's billions of people on the planet, you're dealing with billions of different types of people's realities. What's significant and important to me is vastly different to somebody else across the world at a different latitude and longitude. And so another problem for this constructing a moral compass has to do with, well, how do we do it? One thing is there's a tendency to like, okay, well, let's turn to the religious ideologies of the world to do that. Again, there's some consistency thematically, but not really enough to build a foundation for a social contract or moral compass. Essentially, what should be utilized in composing that moral compass is the inference on international doctrines. The main one they refer to is the United Nations Universal Declarations of Human Rights. Mainly because that's been adopted by a lot of countries. It provides a sound foundation for people to compose that social contract. The other thing that should motivate the concept of a social contract is posterity, for doing something good for future generations. Citizenship education aimed at bringing and teaching future generations the consciousness and competences needed to prosper in a more tolerant, just, and peaceful world. And doing so and having a moral compass, I think that is amendable, that is adaptable. That way to welcome all of these perspectives all of these different realities that people have. Okay, so here's my moral compass that I composed utilizing the newly introduced content knowledge. Here, up at the top, we've got um, what we call moral, good, immoral, right? So in regards to the aspects of here being going the north direction, we have accountability, mindfulness, empathy, and true understanding, equity, consistency, and honesty. In regards to the south, right, we have mental gymnastics, apathy, dishonesty, self-interested bias. So here in the middle, here's how this is what we have to navigate, right? Subjective reality and context. How are we? This comes first. It was like, where are we at? What is the situation? And here in these in this magnetic field of our moral compass, we have emotions and we have information. These two combined, like how we react to the information we perceive, can maybe upset our magnetic field. Um, but in regards to the true north of my moral compass, as succinctly as I can, I developed what's called courageous. I mean, like I didn't come up with that, but what I'm calling it is courageous integrity. Here we have courageous being not necessarily that you're not afraid or scared, is that you do the right thing even when you're scared. So exhibiting courage in the sense of integrity, right? Being honest and fair, equitable, to be both empathetic and to have a developing sense of understanding, to be selfless, the aspect of we. And then, of course, you have the opposite, right? The polar opposite of true north would be true south, or the false south, right? This would include um, cowardly selfishness, wrong. Um, Good for me, despite inflicting, and then the keyword has been harm, right? Harm, exploitation, um, lowering self esteem, lowering self worth, and then doing so because uh, that's good for me. I don't care what happened. That happened to you, not me. I made out okay. If I had to step on some toes, crack some eggs, um, that's what had to be done. It's almost like a kind of like a Machiavellian sense of how to make decisions. And again, the me, right? Um, so if we follow our south, right? If we follow the moral compass south, it leads us to doing immoral actions that are basically concerned about like me, like what's good for me, and this steers us away from Polaris, right? This steers us away from the true north. Okay, this is my reference page. This was made using Screencastify and Google Slides. Okay, the addendum. Okay, let's see. So the resources provided increased my content knowledge of having a moral compass and its benefits by introducing me to several resources that extensively, charismatically, and succinctly described the reasons for having a moral compass, suggestions on how to compose a moral compass, and by describing the challenges that society at large faces in regards to the consensus of what being moral actually means, mainly subjectivity, non-consensus terms, and altering perceptions of reality. Um, and I think the one that stuck with me the most is the varying degrees of our perceptions of reality. Relevancy statement. This assignment improved my understanding of having a moral compass and its benefits. It also agreed and disagreed with my understanding of having a moral compass in regard to different concepts to varying degrees. The article about the unreliability of using empathy as a foundation of morality, that the one that relied heavily on Hannah Arendt, that was actually very difficult for me to read and to fully understand. So like I found myself almost like a little angry at something I'll call like a hit job that they were putting on empathy, because I never really challenged the concept of empathy. It's something I've long championed, like even in classrooms, you know. But this was good because after struggling with the article, like with the density of the language of the article, I kind of became more fascinated on the article's arguments that empathy is actually intrinsically selfish. The know and the feel aspects of empathy um, kind of create an avenue of risk, and that those ideas that are rooted in the empathizer, those feelings of the alleviation of whatever emotions of feeling they're feeling at the time. It's like, you know, doing something, like I need to do something about this because I feel bad. Like it's all rooted on like how I feel, and that actually further the degree to of my understanding of that concept. Personal reflection: gaining this new content knowledge, and by creating a moral compass in my Google slide presentation and using Screencastify, will improve my future educational leadership skills because I have enhanced my understanding of the reasons, challenges, and methodology for composing a moral compass. I am now better equipped to follow this moral compass in a manner that encourages students and teachers to establish and follow their own moral compass. Basically, now I've read the content knowledge, I've composed my own moral compass, which I'm actually pretty proud of. And so I can implement that in the classroom and just in life in general. And hopefully I can use like everything combined to, um, to be a good role model, to be a good friend, to be a good teacher, to be a good global citizen. And that maybe through my actions, that might encourage others to develop their own moral compass and, have a giant, a small ripple that turns into a wave. Okay. Thank you.